This is 21st century Russia. At an airbase in Siberia, dozens of uniformed Russian soldiers are trying to push a massive 100-ton Il-76 cargo plane by hand. This is the military airbase of that nuclear superpower Vladimir Putin spoke of when he said, "We will bring the West to its knees and we will shake the world with our hypersonic missiles." But what you see is not technology. When engineers were sent to the front for special operations, this special pushing operation was left behind. The Russians have now switched to muscle power logistics mode. Now look at these images. Isn't it tragic? This is a Russian Kr-226 helicopter. Inside are Russian engineers developing ground control, diagnostic systems, and other equipment for Sukhoi and MiG aircraft that drop missiles and bombs on Ukrainian cities. But this is not sabotage, it's organ failure. Moscow's sky bridges are now closed. But this is not a simple sector collapse. Western sanctions have brought Russian civil and military aviation to such a state that the once proud giant cargo aviation fleet of Russia has been officially destroyed. The situation is extremely severe and chaotic. Russian cargo fleets have shrunk by half due to a critical shortage of spare parts, a lack of experienced, trained personnel, and a shortage of operational aircraft. The collapse of aviation does not just mean Russian tourists cannot go on vacation. Russia is a vast geography spread across 11 time zones. What holds this country together are railways and airways. When cargo planes stop flying, Russia's circulation system grinds to a halt. What happens when a town in Siberia is waiting for medicine, or a factory in the Far East is waiting for a machine part from Moscow, and that cargo plane cannot take off? The country splits apart. Moscow's authority ends where its planes cannot land. The halt in cargo shipments has halted Russia's industrial modernization and shrunk its consumer market. Right now, Russia's remote regions are effectively breaking away from the central government. Medicines are not getting there, vaccines are not getting there, fresh food is not getting there. Critical spare parts that cannot come from the West are rendering Russia's civilian automobile and machinery factories inoperable. This means a massive army of unemployed for Putin. Logistics is Russia's geographical nightmare, and this nightmare has now become reality. This crisis has hit not only Russia, but also the friendly countries that trade through Russia. Tech giants like China and South Korea used Russian airspace and cargo companies to send their goods to Europe. Now, that route is closed. Exporters in Beijing are forced to send their goods via much longer, much more expensive southern routes. So Putin's war is costing even his biggest ally, China, money. And speaking of allies, the situation has become so toxic that even those wanting to do business with Russia are getting burned. Look at South Africa. Just for allowing a Russian cargo plane to land, they faced a secondary threat from the US. Turkey, the Central Asian republics, they're all on edge. Putin isn't just sinking his own economy, he's dragging everyone who stands by him into that swamp. That's why it's no longer about friendship, but risk analysis. And the analysis shows, doing business with Putin is a risk of bankruptcy. For a country as vast as Russia, air travel is a vital connector and lifeline. The dramatic decline in air connectivity means that remote regions like Siberia and the Far East are becoming disconnected from the central government and essential services. On many routes with no air travel alternative, this isolation is directly impacting the lives of civilians through rising ticket prices, declining service quality, and difficulties accessing basic necessities. The Kremlin's illusion of stability has been wiped out as people in remote regions realize they are no longer connected to Moscow and the world. Dual-use technologies such as microchips, precision sensors, and avionics devices, which are the brains of the war machine, must be transported by air. This disruption in the supply chain will prolong the maintenance and repair times of weapon systems, directly reducing the operational effectiveness of the Russian army on the front lines. This aviation crisis has directly targeted the oligarchs and large state-owned companies that are the financial backbone of Putin's regime. The cargo industry was a symbol of Russia's integration into the global market. Russia's cargo companies were once considered indispensable because they owned Western-made aircraft and used global trade routes. The owners of these companies were powerful businessmen known for their proximity to Putin and for supporting propaganda challenging the West. Now, the warning of cargo airlines closing down is a double disaster for these elites. Due to sanctions, their aircraft abroad have been seized or their leases terminated. Billions of dollars in assets have suddenly become unusable. The halt of their operations within Russia has completely cut off cash flow. A cargo airline cannot survive for long with zero revenue. This means that the oligarchs have lost not only their luxury yachts abroad, but also their core commercial operations within Russia. This situation means that Putin's most powerful financial backers are being driven into bankruptcy, and the Kremlin's power is melting away. In the eyes of the oligarchs, Putin's war is no longer profitable, but destructive. This disillusionment among the elite is a source of internal political pressure on the regime. However, the paralysis of the Russian cargo industry has affected a much wider geography than we thought. Russian cargo companies played a vital role on the West-East axis. With their capacity halved, a significant portion of global trade has suddenly entered a bottleneck that will surge and slow down. China and South Korea are major exporters of high-value, fast-delivery electronic and technological products to Europe and the US. The disruption of Russian airspace and cargo fleets slowed the delivery of these products to the West and increased logistics costs. Exporters in Beijing and Seoul were forced to either shift their shipments to much longer southern routes or turn to expensive alternatives. They faced major difficulties, particularly in shipping critical goods such as medicines and perishable products. Even though EU companies imposed sanctions on Russia, they experienced disruptions in their own supply chains due to the logistical backlash of these sanctions. The US faced increased shipping costs and delays in the electronics and aviation sectors due to a reduction in global cargo capacity. The most interesting part of this crisis is the dilemma faced by countries that Russia considers friends, or that are trying to remain neutral. South Africa is the clearest example of this situation. Despite US sanctions, it allowed a Russian cargo plane to land. While this may seem like a minor diplomatic victory for Moscow, it has placed the South African government under the threat of secondary sanctions from the West. On the one hand, they are trying to show support for Putin as a BRICS ally, while on the other hand, they do not want to risk their fundamental trade relations with the US and the EU. This reluctance shows how fragile Putin's international relations are. Even friendships are now built on risk analysis. Ankara, which is trying to maintain a balance with Russia both economically and politically, is carefully implementing the West's aviation sanctions. Although Turkey has the potential to be a center for the transfer of Western-made parts to Russia using grey plans, official authorities are reluctant to take the great risk of transferring second-hand or uncertified parts. This is because Turkish airlines and logistics companies are closely tied to the international finance and insurance system. The Central Asian republics are of vital importance for the transit of smuggled parts due to their geographical location. However, they are also constantly monitored under pressure from the West. The risk of supplying parts to Russia leaves these small economies facing the danger of severing their ties with the Western financial system. Putin's allies are suffering because of his actions. So what did Putin do to solve this? For decades, Russian civil aviation has relied heavily on technology from Western manufacturers such as Airbus and Boeing. Two-thirds of the Russian fleet consisted of foreign-made aircraft, and more than 90% of passenger transport was entrusted to these Western-made jets. With a sudden decision by Western governments and major manufacturers, this vital supply of parts, technical support, software updates, and insurance services was immediately cut off. Faced with the breakdown of legal supply chains, Russian airlines are desperately implementing the most terrifying and risky strategy in aviation history. We call this cannibalism. The industry term is cannibalisation. What is it? It is dismantling another sound aircraft lying on the ground to fly a sound aircraft, removing its organs and installing them on the other. Russia's largest cargo carriers, Volga-Dnieper, and even the flag carrier Aeroflot have turned Boeing 737s and massive Boeing 747s jumbo jets into spare parts banks. These aircraft will never fly again. They are donors, sacrificed, so their siblings can stay in the air for a few more months. Intelligence reports are chilling. If this cannibalism continues, the Russian fleet will shrink by more than 50% by 2026. By 2030, only about 700 scrap heaps will remain of the 1,300 aircraft currently in service. But that's not the real danger. The real danger is the safety of Russian citizens who board those planes. Because the parts being removed have a lifespan, and that lifespan is coming to an end. What are they replacing them with? Uncertified, industrial-grade copies of unknown origin from China, Iran, and the black market. What happens if you put a non-original brake pad on a Boeing? Russia is currently testing the answer to that question, and the results are starting to come in. Aviation safety incident reports in Russia doubled in 2023 compared to the previous year. Planes are malfunctioning in mid-air, engines are catching fire, landing gear is failing to deploy. Putin, in his stubborn determination to continue the war, is putting his own people on flying coffins. This desperation has grown so great that the Moscow administration, which declared it would never bow to the West, was forced to make one of the most shameful U-turns in history. Vladimir Putin, who defied the West, saying, "Sanctions don't work on us," is now forced to go door to door on the international stage, begging through his own bureaucrats, "Our planes are going to crash, give us spare parts." Do you know where they went? To the ICAO, that is, the International Civil Aviation Organization. Russia made an official request to ICAO. They said, "Please ease the sanctions. Our flight safety is at risk. Give us parts." This is not a challenge, it is a plea. It means, give us parts or our planes will crash. ICAO rejected this call and condemned Russia. There's more. Russia was also working to be elected to ICAO's 36-member governing council. However, a spokesperson for Canada's Global Affairs Ministry clearly stated that the North American country did not support this candidacy. Russia again failed to secure enough votes, as it did in 2022. Behind Russia's security-based call to ICAO lies Moscow's confrontation with a dual security threat, both internal and external. Russian cargo planes, while officially civilian, are in fact an integral part of military logistics. They are used to transport critical equipment, ammunition, or high-value imported parts to the front lines. This makes them legitimate targets for Ukrainian sabotage. The increase in attacks by Ukrainian UAVs on military air bases and critical industrial facilities on Russian territory also leaves airports where cargo planes are located vulnerable. A successful attack on a cargo plane would deal an immediate and serious blow to Russia's logistical capacity. Putin is forced to defend airports against Ukraine's sabotage threat on one hand, while managing the risk of his own aircraft falling apart in the air due to parts shortages on the other. This dual threat shows that he is in trouble both externally and internally. The Russian people now clearly see that their government cannot protect them, but instead puts them at risk. These are concrete, human, and economic realities that Putin's propaganda machine can no longer stop. The Kremlin may ban the word stagnation, but it cannot ban the silence from the sky, the cries of bankruptcy, and the panicked voices of its own allies. When Russia's cargo planes landed, Putin's arrogance in the sky also landed. So, what do you think about this? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.